what I consider this whole ESG argument of replaceability, it's not a real argument by people who understand or care about energy. It's a fake argument designed to reassure us that it's okay to get rid of fossil fuels and we won't suffer any consequences.
Well, it feels like, to your point, kind of market participants, people who are used to dealing with energy, who understand the value of energy, who understand why you want energy versus energy poverty. Those people, this isn't even a debate. It is more of a moral argument or a virtue signaling argument that goes on at the Davoses of the world, et cetera, where people say these things and it makes them feel good. It sounds amazing, right? We're going to replace all the fossil fuels with, wind and solar. But it just, there's no path to it. And you've written a book called Fossil Future, Why Global Human Flourishing Requires More Oil, Coal, and Natural Gas, Not Less. And so when we think about this, I thought that maybe we could go through some of the energy sources and you could kind of talk about what we're seeing. Let's go right to what the ESG kind of proponents, I think, believe is the replacement, which is solar and wind. And they position this as a low-cost, reliable, renewable energy source. Why are they wrong?
Whenever possible, I always like to look at, this came up with climate, what is people's account of the present? So if you view the climate as in a state of crisis, if you think we're experiencing a climate crisis, then you're either ignorant or you're not looking at the world from a pro-human perspective, which we could talk about. But I think that with climate, people are looking at it as the goal is not advancing human flourishing through a more livable climate, because by that standard, climate is far more livable, we're far safer. But their goal is to eliminate human impact on Earth, including eliminating our impact on climate. And it's really this kind of primitive religious asceticism and fear that just says let's eliminate what we're doing. Let's just stop. Let's go net zero. It's not make the climate livable. It's just stop our evil impact. So I think it's very, very much a primitive anti-human religion that believes that our impact is evil and that nature is like a vengeful God that's going to punish us with this kind of hellish warming and climate change. So I just think it's based on a total distortion. And so the point here is if somebody doesn't acknowledge the present or they deny or distort it, I don't trust them to predict the future. And the same thing is true. I make a big point of this in Fossil Future about the renewables thing. Look, if people said what I just said, so if they said, hey, look, I have to admit, so far, solar and wind are a disaster because what they have done is they have not replaced reliable electricity because we don't have anywhere resembling the batteries for that. As I calculated in the book, Elon Musk's batteries, it cost us about $400 trillion to back up the world for 3 days. So that is a fantasy or worse. So basically they're a failure because they've added a lot of cost to the grid because we have to pay for the solar panels and the infrastructure, but we haven't really been able to replace any of the reliable fossil fuels, nuclear or hydro, because the unreliable solar and wind can go near zero at any given time. And then when we do try to get rid of the fossil fuels or nuclear or hydro, such as has happened in Texas and California, we have blackouts. And so we're having problems with cost and problems with reliability. And in any case, these things are nowhere near replacing fossil fuels, even in electricity, let alone things like heavy duty transportation, such as flying or cargo ships. And so right now they're a failure, but I have an amazing explanation of how they're going to be a wild success. Like if they said that, I would listen to that explanation. But instead, what we get is denial and distortion about how they're working and a total evasion of the fact that they're making the world worse. Now, I should say this is getting a lot better intellectually because we have an energy crisis, and it's pretty clear that we've artificially restricted the supply of fossil fuels through ESG and political opposition to investment, production, and transportation. And unreliable solar and wind, as I think we should have expected, cannot at all replace fossil fuels, which is why I was talking to Michael Schellenberger, who's running for governor in California, a good friend of mine. Like he was pointing out yesterday, why is nobody running for more solar panels right now? Like, why is it Biden not begging China for more solar panels? He's begging Venezuela for more oil. And it's because the solar and wind, this unreliable energy, cannot replace fossil fuels. And nobody expects it to be able to do so in the near future. And that's just the reality. And all of these arguments are just total crackpot fantasy. So we can get into the crackpot fantasies, but the fact that they totally deny the terrible present of solar and wind is very revealing.
Talk to me about the crackpot fantasies. That sounds like exactly what I want to talk about.
Okay. Well, this has become one of my favorite topics because I actually have this is the only thing in Fossil Future that I can explain better now than I could when it was written. Yeah, I've thought a lot about this because I don't know do you happen to see those Joe Rogan episodes with Steve Koonin or Andrew Dessler?
I have not, no.
Okay, those are interesting. Just many people watching this, I'm guessing, saw some of them. So Steve Koonin is a guy who's kind of known as allied with me. He's one of these people who says, yes, we impact climate, but the negatives of that are far outweighed by the benefits of fossil fuels. So I don't mean to attribute everything he believes to me and vice versa. We have differences, but we're generally aligned in that way. And then the person who came on to kind of be equal time was a guy named Andrew Dessler, who's a climate scientist from Texas A&M. And interestingly, Andrew basically made no arguments about climate catastrophe, but his almost sole focus, or very few, let's say, his almost sole focus was, renewables can rapidly replace fossil fuels. And he and I, he fortunately had agreed to debate me before he did that Rogan show. And so we debated in Colorado, and people can look it up if they search our names. And I was just kind of astonished, like how in denial he was of the actual reality of solar and wind. But I noticed he's relying on this one argument that came up on that show, which is basically, hey, there are academic studies that show that we can do this. So leave aside like Dessler because he wasn't representing the studies effectively, and that's accurate in this kind of thing. But here's what's going on. All of these studies are claiming that in one way or another, again, we can rapidly replace fossil fuels with solar and wind. They all have three things in common. One is that and all of these we know are things that lead to indeterminate and high prices. So one is they involve things that have never been done before on a large scale. I mean, they've never been done before, and they involve doing them on a large scale. So, for example, one of the mainstream ones by a guy named Jacobson out of Stanford involves hydrogen planes. Okay, we don't have commercial hydrogen planes. This is just a total fantasy of this even existing, how it would work, what the costs would be. So if you claim to know that will work and what the costs will be, you're a charlatan. And there are all sorts of things like this in these schemes that are just things that aren't working on any scale, and they're claiming they'll work on every scale. So that's number one. It's just crackpot. Number two is that they involve a crash program of unprecedented mining and infrastructure building. So you take like what's happening with lithium prices right now, they're skyrocketing. This was obvious that this would happen because we had this crash program of even on a small scale, but we're talking about, I think Elon was talking recently about 1,000 times more lithium, at least they're talking hundreds of times more lithium. How is that going to be cheap to do that in the next 27 and a half years? How is it going to be cheap to build unprecedented infrastructure in 27 and a half years? Whenever you do a large scale thing on a crash program, your costs go up. And then the third thing that makes it just totally disingenuous is that all of this is supposed to happen. All of this unprecedented, never done, unprecedented development is supposed to happen in today's environment, which is very hostile to development. So this is all in an anti-development environment, which the green movement has created. So the people claiming these schemes have created this anti-development environment where none of this can happen. If you're lucky, it takes 10 years to approve a lithium mine in the US, and it may not get approved. Solar and wind are radically slowed already by green activists who are against mining, who are against transmission lines, who are against construction. So this is another example. These three crackpot elements are just another nail in the coffin of this being a movement that cares about energy. They don't care about energy. They care about getting rid of fossil fuels. They're also hostile to nuclear and hydro, which is also revealing. So their whole focus is just how do we get human beings to stop impacting the planet, and let's make up a fantasy so that we're not worried, so that people don't worry about giving up fossil fuels. But we have an energy crisis that shows we should have been worried. And by the way, I posted the other day some testimony I had in 2016 in front of the Senate. And I told Boxer and others, hey, like this is going to cause a crisis. It's obvious. And they ridiculed me because oh, you're a philosopher. You don't know anything. And I'm like, no, I'm a philosopher. So I know you need to look at the big picture, and you're not looking at the benefits of fossil fuels. And that's why it's going to be a disaster.